The gunsmith's hands trembled not from fear, but from restraint. Laughter rolled across Range R3 at Redstone Arsenal as Elise Warren knelt beside a jammed M4, quiet and methodical. "Need us to color code the instructions for you, sweetheart?" someone shouted. A few of the younger soldiers chuckled, elbowing each other. Elise didn't flinch. Even when Gunnery Sergeant Travis Harlan stepped in close, voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe you'd be more useful back in the stockroom building gear. This range is for the real thing." She gave no response. Just reached into her vest to retrieve a tool. That's when something shifted. A frayed, nearly colorless patch peeked out beneath the edge of her gear gray thread. Custom cut. Ghost Co. 7. Not regulation. Not public. Not worn openly by anyone in years. Harlan saw it. His voice stopped. Just for a beat. Only one woman had ever worn that patch during Black Ops. And she vanished 5 years ago after Crimson Shield. His eyes held on the shape longer than he intended. Then he pulled himself upright, forcing a scoff. "You don't belong out here. Try inventory control," he said, louder this time, regaining his stance. Elise didn't look up. Her fingers moved with slow, practiced rhythm, clearing the chamber, rotating the bolt carrier, inspecting fouling with the precision of someone trained on more than just manuals. The others kept talking, kept performing. "She looks more like she belongs at the base cafe," someone muttered. "Probably got the job through some inclusion program," another added. As Elise reached for the drop scope, her sleeve lifted just enough for a trace of black ink to show on her pale skin. A stylized Trident custom, accompanied by 4 small stars. No name, no fanfare. Harlan saw it. His words caught mid-sentence. But the moment passed too quickly. No one else noticed. Elise tugged the sleeve back down and returned to the task at hand. The other soldiers didn't see their leader hesitate. They didn't ask why his tone changed. They had no idea they had just mocked someone who once operated in places none of them had clearance to pronounce. Someone who wrote the manuals they studied. Someone whose story wasn't on paper because it wasn't meant to be. She never corrected them. She never said a word. Elise Warren just showed up, did her work, and stayed quiet. People made jokes, called her names behind her back, and thought she didn't belong. But they didn't know they were talking to the last surviving member of one of the most secret units in U.S. military history, Ghost Co. 7 from Coronado. Her uniform didn't have a name tag. No rank, no patches, just tools and focus. That's how she introduced herself, not with words, but with discipline and action. They didn't know her story, but by the end of the day, they would. Have you ever been judged before someone took the time to understand who you were? Have you seen someone treated badly because of assumptions? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to hold your tongue while someone looked down on you, then you already know why this story matters. Elise Warren didn't come back to be noticed. But they're about to learn what it means to misjudge someone who should have never been forgotten. One soldier said she looked more suited for pouring coffee at the PX. Another muttered something about her probably landing the job through some diversity quota. They said it just loud enough for each other to hear, just quiet enough to pretend they hadn't. As Elise reached for the drop scope, her sleeve lifted slightly. The edge of ink showed on her forearm. Sharp lines. Black, faint, but deliberate. A modified seal trident, 1 star for each operation. 3 names woven beneath. No flourish, no ceremony. Gunnery Sergeant Harlan caught a glimpse of it mid-sentence. His voice stalled in his throat. But the moment passed too fast. Elise pulled her sleeve back down and returned to her tools. Her movements never broke rhythm. The men around her didn't notice their NCO falter. They didn't question the patch. They had no idea they were mocking the last living ghost of Ghost Co. 7. Have you ever been dismissed before someone even knew who you were? I'm curious, where are you watching from? And if you've ever endured disrespect because of someone else's ignorance, you'll understand exactly what happens next. Elise Warren presented herself to the world in the most invisible way possible. At 34, she wore loose contractor clothes that hid her athletic frame. Her blonde hair was always pulled into a low, no-nonsense ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry. She spoke only when absolutely necessary, and even then, it was in short, clipped phrases, usually involving terms like barrel erosion or trigger creep. The other contractors had learned to work around her silence. They called her the weird one or the mute ghost in Bay 7. None of them knew she spent her evenings running 3 miles around the base perimeter, rain or shine. 1 mile for each ghost that followed her. Her reputation existed only in the work she left behind. When elite operators brought in weapons declared unsalvageable, Elise fixed them. She didn't guess. She listened. She could diagnose malfunctions by sound alone. Her understanding of ballistics rivaled that of anyone wearing officer rank. But she never explained how she knew what she knew. She never bragged. She never corrected anyone's assumptions. The calluses on her hands told a different story. Not the kind you earn from a gunsmith's bench. Between her thumb and forefinger, thickened skin from holding a rifle stock for hours on end. Along the edges of her palms, smoothed over from fast roping out of helicopters. Too symmetrical, too consistent. The kind that comes from doing it 1,000 times, not once in training. Her knees bore the marks of a different kind of discipline, permanent reminders of countless hours spent prone, locked in firing positions. These weren't just the hands of someone who fixed weapons. They were the hands of someone who had lived behind one. 5 years ago, before she became a ghost, the world knew her another way. Captain Elise Warren, call sign, Shade Leader of Ghost Co. 7. A woman who could infiltrate a hostile structure unnoticed, eliminate a threat without raising alarm, and vanish before anyone knew she was there. Naval Command never published her photo. No official record tied her name to what she did. But her methods, those stayed. To this day, special warfare schools still teach her approach to silent entry. Her tactics saved lives. Her silence kept them alive. Now she worked in shadows again. Not on the battlefield, but behind benches and bolts. And if you paid close enough attention, you'd see it in her hands before you ever saw it in her eyes. The basement of C building smelled like spent powder and old memories. At 11:45 in the morning, the Alabama heat hadn't reached this far underground, but the air was still heavy, thick with age and metal. Yellow fluorescent tubes hummed from above, casting long shadows across rows of crates and rusted racks. A clipboard hung askew on the wall, its inventory list faded to gray smudges no one read anymore. Elise stepped between 2 aisles of surplus gear, hands bare, sleeves rolled. She didn't say why she'd volunteered for this cleanup detail, no one asked. Truth was, she knew what she was looking for. She crouched beside a crate marked, meaning, defunct cereals, unlatched the corroded locks, and opened it with both hands. Her eyes didn't scan the contents like she was browsing. They searched like she'd been dreaming of this moment for years. And there it was, wrapped in a tan cloth, tied with twine. She unfolded it slowly. Her fingers moved as if afraid the steel might vanish. A Beretta M9, slide slightly dulled, wear marks along the lower rail. Underneath the grip, plate barely visible, except at just the right angle, was a number carved by hand, QR-17. Her breath caught. She sat back, knees to concrete, both palms resting flat on the ground beside her. Not to balance, just to feel something solid. That number didn't come from supply logs. It came from the hand of Hank Doyler, her spotter. Her second, her steady voice in the chaos of Black Dune. He'd etched it there himself on the morning they went into Cinderline. Said he didn't trust official tags anymore. Elise stared at the weapon for a long time. She didn't flinch when she heard the boots. Gunnery Sergeant Harlan rounded the corner, clipboard in one hand, a folded manifest in the other. He spotted her kneeling beside the crate, saw the pistol in her hands, and paused. For once, his voice wasn't mocking. You logged that one, or is it your keepsake? She didn't turn to look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the M9. It belonged to someone who trusted me, she said quietly. I didn't return the favor fast enough. Harlan didn't reply. He stood there for a moment, as if weighing whether to say something else, some correction, some quip. But he didn't. He just gave the faintest nod and walked back the way he came, slower than before. Elise waited until his footsteps disappeared down the corridor, before she placed the pistol back in its cloth wrap, retying the twine with care. She didn't cry. She didn't allow that kind of release. Instead, she reached into her left sleeve and slowly rolled it up to the elbow. The tattoo was faint from time and sunno-flashy colors, no dramatic flair. A reimagined seal trident. 4 stars. Beneath it, in ink, no wider than a pencil line, were the names L. Ramirez, Q. Foster, H. Doyle. And beneath them, 2 words, never forgotten. She touched her forearm lightly, fingertips grazing the ink. Not to admire it, to remember its weight. When Leo was hit by shrapnel and still insisted on covering their 6, when Quinn dragged a wounded civilian for half a mile under fire, when Hank had the shot lined up and called her off not to spare himself, but to let her live, they didn't die in a blaze of glory. They died holding their position so she could exfil with the intel, so she could come back, so someone would remember. In this basement, this forgotten storage tomb was as close to sacred ground as she'd get. She didn't carry medals, didn't frame photos, didn't do interviews, but she carried this. Every step, every night run, every click of every weapon she repaired. A prayer in steel, a ritual in silence. She pulled her sleeve back down, slid the pistol into a separate pouch. Not to keep, not to steal, just to hold on to a little longer. By the time she left the C-building basement, the light had shifted outside. The shadows were shorter. The air was warmer. And somewhere in the distance, a whistle blew signaling lunch shift rotation. No one saw the change in her step. No one noticed the quiet tightening of her jaw. But Elise Warren was walking a little straighter, because that day, in the dim belly of Redstone Arsenal, she found something she didn't know she needed. Not forgiveness, just the weight, and the promise to carry it well. At 13:07, the siren wailed through Redstone Arsenal. Not the usual drill tone, not the weekly test. This was the low, dragging pitch of a code black. Every operator and civilian contractor froze. It meant breach either cyber or physical, and no one knew which. In the Alpha Quadrant, where hardened bunkers and weapons prototypes lived side by side, the panic settled in fast. Elise Warren was in the middle of recalibrating a damaged HK-416. She didn't look up. Instead, she pressed the safety, locked the chamber, and slid the rifle into the supply crate next to her. Then, slowly, she reached behind her and unclipped the strap that held her torque gloves to the inside of her vest. Down the hall, someone tripped. Another shouted. Heavy boots slammed the floor. The base's younger operators were trying to remember procedures they barely trained for. Elise moved calmly. She crossed to the center hallway, low-lit, cold, echoing GAN reached for the wall panel. With a code only Ghost Coast 7 would have known, she opened a hidden weapons drawer behind a supply cabinet labeled Unserviceable. Inside, 1 short-barreled AR, 1 sidearm, 3 mags. She didn't hesitate. From the far end of the corridor, Harlan appeared, jacket half-zipped, sidearm still holstered, eyes scanning for leadership. He caught sight of her just as she slammed the drawer shut and chambered around. "You can't be armed," he barked. She didn't speak, just tossed a vest toward him and pointed to the reinforced blast doors at the end of the hall. They were closing. He hesitated but grabbed the vest anyway. Then he saw the patch on her shoulder. It hadn't been there before, hidden beneath her outer layer, now exposed. Ghost Co. 7 Operation Crimson Shield. Kandahar Unit 9. His face paled. "You're?" She nodded once, then bolted toward the evac grid. In the upper admin tower, Sergeant Lyle Jacobs had barricaded himself and 3 new recruits in the comms room. The lockdown sequence hadn't reached their panel yet. The recruits were panicking. One of them held a loaded rifle the wrong way. The safety was off. When Elise burst through the double doors, the chaos swirled, yelling, radio static, broken orders. Then the recruit slipped, finger near the trigger, rifle spinning downward. She caught it, mid-air, snatched the weapon before it discharged. Hit the safety, checked the chamber, tossed it aside. One motion, one breath. Jacob stared at her, stunned. "You're not cleared for." "I don't need clearance," she said. "You need a corridor team, a fallback perimeter, and someone to shut down the west panel before the breach hits the backup line." "How the hell do you know that?" "I wrote the protocol. In 2012. She turned to the youngest recruit, still frozen. "Get to the south stairs, barricade them with the angled desk. Use your body if you have to. And tell no one who I am." He nodded like a man who just saw lightning strike twice. 20 minutes later, the code black resolved. It had been a false alarma-triggered backup sensor from a test drill that hadn't been cleared from the logbook. But something had changed. People noticed. Rumors spread about a woman in the lower halls, about how she moved, what she said, the things she did. Harlan didn't speak about it, but that night, he stood outside Alpha Compound with a clipboard. Elise passed him on her second lap. He said nothing, just nodded, and didn't look away. Later, Elise sat alone in the repair bay, wiping down a rifle that hadn't even been fired. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from remembering. Remembering how easy it had been to fall back into formation. How instinct still lived in her bones. How 3 names were still with her in that hallway. Not as voices, but as reason, as purpose, as weight she chose to carry. At 6:30 the next morning, the fog hadn't yet cleared from Redstone's southeast range. The asphalt still held the chill from the night before, and dew clung to the metal shipping crates like frost on grave markers. A convoy of command vehicles rolled through Gate C. At the front, an unmarked SUV, windows tinted, flanked by 2 Humvees. Inside the SUV sat Brigadier General Marshall Grant, decorated, deliberate, and rarely seen outside Pentagon walls. He didn't like publicity, but today was different. He wasn't here for a speech, he was here for a name. Elise didn't notice the convoy. She was in Bay 7, calibrating recoil springs for the new XM5 platforms. Her gloves were off, elbows bare. Sweat soaked through the back of her collar from the early exertion. She didn't hear him enter, but someone else did. Private Lucas Green, barely 22 and known for his nervous hands, was helping stack empty crates nearby. He saw the boots first polished, dark brown, ceremonial. Then the 4-star tab. He stood straight, too straight, knocked over a can of lubricant in the process. Elise turned. The general didn't speak right away. He looked at her forearms, at the scars, at the faint outline of ink just visible above the right tendon. A forked trident. 4 stars. 3 initials. Then he stepped forward. "Captain Warren," he said. Lucas blinked. "Captain?" Elise didn't answer. Grant nodded once, as if confirming something long debated. Then he turned slightly loud enough for the room to hear, but quiet enough that it felt like respect. "You were Ghost Coast 7, Operation Crimson Shield. Kandahar Unit 9. She looked at him, eyes steady. "I was." They said no one made it out, that the ridge was compromised. It was. Grant's voice dropped. "And yet here you are, calibrating rifles." There was no sarcasm in his tone, just grief, and memory, and something else, the weight of someone who'd read every after-action report and still couldn't sleep. The room had gone still. Lucas didn't move. The 2 other operators nearby had stopped mid-step. No one reached for their phones. No one made a sound. The name Crimson Shield wasn't taught in training manuals, but those who knew remembered, especially the numbers. 9 entered, 4 were declared MIA, 3 confirmed KIA, 1 unrecovered asset. That asset was standing in front of them, holding a carbon steel barrel in grease-streaked hands. General Grant stepped forward and extended his hand. Not out of ceremony, but out of acknowledgement. Elise hesitated, then removed one glove. Their handshake was brief but final. When he released her hand, Grant looked to the others. "This woman led the unit that saved my son's team in 2008. 3 of her men never came back. She did, and she's been carrying that since." No one responded. They didn't have to. As Grant turned to leave, he paused. "You ever think about coming back, in an official role?" Elise wiped a streak of carbon from her palm. "Only when it rains." That made him smile. "You still remember how to break silence with style." He nodded to her one last time, then exited the bay. The silence remained, but it was no longer tense. It was full. Full of realization. Full of earned reverence. Later that afternoon, Lucas found her by the old mess hall steps. He didn't say anything at first, just sat 2 feet away. Then, "I looked up Crimson Shield. I saw the number." Elise said nothing. "I think I owe you an apology For last week. She shook her head. Don't owe me anything, she said quietly. Just make sure you don't laugh when the next ghost walks in. That evening, the range went quiet as the sun fell behind the trees. Elise stood at the edge of the tarmac, alone. She rolled her sleeve down, covering the tattoo again, but in her mind, the names remained uncovered. And for the first time in 5 years, so did hers. At exactly 16:10, the clouds above Redstone thinned, but the ground still held heat from the day. The tactical field behind Range 4 was silent, too silent for a weekday. The instructors stood still, arms behind backs. The recruits lined up, not in attention, but something heavier, a hush of reverence they didn't yet understand. Elise Warren walked toward the group, sleeves rolled down, hands clean from the workbench, eyes unreadable. Beside the bleachers stood Gunnery Stata, Caldwell, one of the few who had seen real action in the old campaigns, who'd buried friends in sand and snow alike. He called out not with volume, but with precision. Chief Warren, or should I say, Captain Shade. Every head turned, some eyes went wide, others narrowed in disbelief. Elise stopped mid-step. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she stepped forward, deliberate, unflinching. She rolled her right sleeve back, slow and final. And there it was. The custom-sealed trident, 4 stars, 3 initials. Scars, too. But the names etched around the ink told more. L. Ramirez, Q. Foster, H. Doyle. Never forgotten. Someone near the back whispered, Ghost Co. 7. A few recruits shifted their weight. No one laughed. No one dared. Then a sound broke the stillness. A sharp breath, and the unmistakable thud of a man dropping to one knee. It was Travis Harlan. He wasn't looking at Elise. He was staring at the name at the bottom of the ink, H. Doyle. His voice cracked as he spoke, barely above the wind. Hank Doyle was my cousin. I knew who you were. I hated you, because you lived. No one exhaled. Elise didn't step back. She didn't look away. Her voice was low, but it didn't waver. Then don't fail him twice. The field stayed silent. Not from confusion, but clarity. The kind that doesn't need orders. That comes from something older than rank. Caldwell gave no command, and yet every soldier in sight came to attention, boots locked, shoulders square. Not out of protocol. Out of respect. Minutes passed. Elise finally rolled her sleeve back down. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. She walked across the field, boots brushing the gravel. She didn't hurry, she didn't flinch. As she passed Harlan, still on one knee, he looked up. His eyes were red, but clear. She nodded just once. That was enough. Back near the edge of the field, Caldwell spoke again. Quiet, but heard. Ghosts aren't gone, they're just waiting to be remembered. One by one, the recruits began to process what they'd witnessed. That the silent tech who fixed their optics without complaint had once led men into hell and brought back what she could. That courage didn't always shout. Sometimes it calibrated. Sometimes it carried names instead of stripes. That night, in the barracks lounge, nobody mentioned the tattoo. Nobody brought up the trident or the mission code. But the jokes stopped. So did the whispered nicknames. And when Elise walked by, they made space not from fear, but from reverence. They saw the weight now. Not on her face, but in the way she carried her silence. Harlan found her outside the armory, just after 21:00. He wasn't in uniform anymore, just jeans and an old USMC sweatshirt. The air had cooled, but he looked flushed, as if he'd just come from a run he didn't plan. He didn't make excuses. Didn't try to explain the anger, or the guilt, or the bitterness that had festered since Hank's death. He just said, he talked about you, you know, said you were the last person he trusted. Elise looked at him. He was the last person who covered my blind side. A pause. I failed him, but not the way you think. Harlan nodded. You lived. She nodded back. So now I carry him. Then she turned and walked back toward the hangars. He didn't follow, but he stayed standing there, hands clenched, eyes wet, for a long time. Up in her quarters, Elise unrolled the cloth she kept in the side compartment of her locker. Inside, One photo. Faded. 4 faces, smiling after a desert op in 7. No rank, no patches, just sand and teeth and sunburn. She touched each name, whispered them, then folded the cloth again, tucked it away, and sat in silence, letting herself remember. Not as punishment, but as promise. It was nearly 19:00 when Elise returned to Bay 4. The corridors had emptied. The sun outside cast long shadows against the cinder block walls of the maintenance wing. For the first time in weeks, her boots didn't echo alone. She paused by the locked steel cabinet at the far end, pulled out the logbook, signed her initials. Just as she turned, she saw him. Colonel Elias Monroe, Operations Commander, Tactical Training Division. He wasn't flanked by aides. He wasn't in full dress. Just the green fatigues, nameplate dulled by time, and an envelope in hand. "Captain Warren?" he said without preamble. She didn't correct him. "I reviewed the footage," he added, handing her the envelope. "From the exercise, from earlier, from hell, from the past 2 months." She accepted it, wordless. The seal bore the insignia of Redstone Arsenal Command. Inside, a single file. No cover sheet, no security warning. Just a title. Operation Ghost File Project Exodus. Declassified, command eyes only. And beneath it, one line handwritten in thick black ink. She never stopped serving, she just changed her battlefield. Monroe didn't sit. He leaned against the edge of the metal bench beside her. "You never wanted a ceremony," he said, "or the commendation." She shook her head. "Never earned it." "You earned more than most men on that wall," he muttered, gesturing at the faded mission plaques mounted along the corridor. "And you kept showing up even after we forgot your name." "I didn't need it remembered," she replied, voice low. "Just needed to make sure no one else ended up buried because their weapon jammed at the wrong time." He looked at her, not with command, but with something closer to reverence. "We're building something," he said. "A new initiative. Women-led urban response teams. Low-profile, high readiness. Volunteer-based. Quiet shadows with clear orders." She didn't answer. He took that as permission to continue. "They asked me for a name. Someone to train them. I gave yours." Elise stayed still. After a beat, she asked, "What's the mission profile?" Monroe pulled a folded document from his cargo pocket, slid it across the table. "Code name, Lazarus Tier. Starts July. 3-month prep. Advisory lead with full autonomy. You choose the candidates, you write the book." She didn't pick it up, but she looked at it. The edge of her right hand twitched slightly just once over the word Lazarus. Then she spoke, slowly. "I'll read the file. That's all I'll promise." Monroe nodded. "That's all I hoped." As he stood to leave, he hesitated. "One more thing," he added, his voice quieter. "Your ghost file? It never got closed. I pulled it this morning. Top sheet still reads, operational, status, unknown." He gave her a faint smile. "You want me to update that?" Elise met his gaze, then said the first full sentence she had spoken to anyone all day. "Not yet." That night, she sat alone in the far end of the supply yard, just past the razor wire gate where the lights dimmed and the stars broke through. She held the Lazarus file in one hand. In the other, an old photograph, edges curling from time, 4 figures, dirt smudged, arms slung over one another, 3 of them gone. She turned the photo over, faded handwriting still legible. "If we don't make it home, make it matter." Below the photo, folded into the Lazarus file, was something new. A sealed, unsigned letter. Just 5 words inside. "Shade, you were always the light." She didn't smile, didn't cry. She simply breathed. And in that breath, a decade of grief softened just enough to leave room for something else. Not peace, but possibility. Certainly. Elise Warren didn't speak much. She didn't ask for credit, didn't seek attention. But in her quiet way, she reminded us that honor doesn't fade just because the world forgets to say thank you. Too often, we look at someone and make assumptions. We think we know their story by their clothes, their job, their silence. But behind every quiet person might be a lifetime of sacrifice, love, and courage that deserves more than judgment. It deserves respect. Maybe you've been through something like that. Maybe someone you know has? If this story spoke to you even just a little, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear your story too. And if you believe some people deserve to be remembered, even if they never asked to be, consider subscribing. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and may you always be seen for who you really are. Take care.